The Book of Dede Korkut is the most famous among the epic stories of the Oghuz Turks. The stories carry morals and values significant to the social lifestyle of the nomadic Turkic peoples and the pre-Islamic beliefs. The book's mythic narrative is part of the cultural heritage of Turkic countries, including Turkey, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan and to a lesser degree Kyrgyzstan. The epic tales of Dede Korkut are some of the best-known Turkic dastans from among a total of well over 1,000 recorded epics among the Mongolian and Turkic language families. Origin and synopsis of the epic. Dede Korkut is a heroic dastan, also known as Oghuz Nama among the Oghuz Turk people, which starts out in Central Asia, continues in Anatolia and Iran, and centers most of its action in the Azerbaijani Caucasus. According to Barthold, it is not possible to surmise that this dastan could have been written anywhere but in the Caucasus. For the Turkic peoples, especially people who identify themselves as Oghuz, it is the principal repository of ethnic identity, history, customs and the value systems of the Turkic peoples throughout history. It commemorates struggles for freedom at a time when the Oghuz Turks were a herding people, although it is clear that the stories were put into the present form at a time when the Turks of Oghuz descent no longer thought of themselves as Oghuz. For the mid-10th century on, the term Oghuz was gradually supplanted among the Turks themselves by Turkoman. This process was completed by the beginning of the 13th century. The Turkomans were those Turks, mostly but not exclusively Oghuz, who had embraced Islam and begun to lead a more sedentary life than the forefathers. In the 14th century, a federation of Oghuz, or as they were by this time termed Turkoman tribesmen, who called themselves Akkoyanlu, established a dynasty that ruled eastern Turkey, Azerbaijan, Iraq and western Iran. Contents. The 12 stories that comprise the bulk of the work were written down after the Turks converted to Islam, and the heroes are often portrayed as good Muslims while the villains are referred to as infidels. But there are also many references to the Turks' pre-Islamic magic. The character Dede Korkut, i.e., Grandfather Korkut, is a widely renowned soothsayer and bard, and serves to link the stories together, and the 13th chapter of the book compiles sayings attributed to him. In the dastans, Dede Korkut appears as the Aksakal, the advisor, a sage, solving the difficulties faced by tribal members. Among the population, respected Aksakals are wise and know how to solve problems. Among Ashiks they are generally called Dede. In the past, this term designated respected tribal elders, and now is used within families. In many localities of Azerbaijan, it replaces Ata. The historian Rashid al-Din Hamadani says that Dede Korkut was a real person and lived for 295 years. That he appeared in the time of the Oghuz ruler Inalsir Yavwi Khan, by whom he was sent as ambassador to the Prophet, that he became Muslim, that he gave advice to the great Khan of the Oghuz, attended the election of the great Khan, and gave names to children. The tales tell of warriors and battles and are likely grounded in the conflicts between the Oghuz and the Pechenegs and Kipchaks. Many story elements are familiar to those versed in the Western literary tradition. For example, the story of a monster named Gogol-Antep bears enough resemblance to the encounter with the Cyclops in Homer's Odyssey that it is believed to have been influenced by the Greek epic to have one common ancient root. The book also describes in great detail the various sports activities of the ancient Turkic peoples. Dede Korkut clearly referred to certain physical activities and games. In Dede Korkut's description, the athletic skills of Turks, men and women, were described to be first-rate, especially in horse riding, archery, chariot wrestling and polo, which are considered Turkish national sports. Synopsis. Bofach Khan, son of Dirsha Khan, tells the story of the miraculous birth of Bofach Khan, how he grew up to become a mighty warrior and earned a princedom, how his father Dirsha Khan was tricked by his own warriors into trying to kill him, how his mother saved his life, and how he rescued his father from the treacherous warriors. Korkut arrives at the celebration and creates the story. How Salyur Kazan's house was pillaged, tells how the infidel Georgian king Shokli raided Salyur Kazan's encampment while Kazan and his nobles were hunting, how Kazan and the heroic shepherd Karajak teamed up to track down Shokli, how Kazan's wife Lady Burla and son Duras showed quick thinking and heroism in captivity, and how Kazan's men arrived to help Kazan defeat Shokli. Bamzi Bayrik of the Grey Horse tells how the young son of Prince Babur proved his worth and earned the name Bamzi Bayrik, how he won the hand of Lady Chichek against the resistance of her brother Crazy Karcha, how he was kidnapped by King Shokli's men and held captive for 16 years, and how he escaped upon hearing that Lady Chichek was being given to another man and how he won her back. Korkut appears as an actor in the story, giving Bayrik his name and later helping him outwit Crazy Karcha. How Prince Ura's son of Prince Kazan was taken prisoner, tells how Salyur Kazan realized that his son Duras was 16 but had never seen battle, how Kazan and Duras were attacked by the infidels while on a hunt, how Duras entered the fray and was taken captive, how Lady Burla reacted on realizing her son was in danger, how Kazan tracked down the infidels and how Duras begged him to flee, and how Lady Burla and Kazan's men arrived and helped Kazan rescue Duras. This story mentions 3 infidel kings, Shokli, Kara Tukan, and Bugachuk, who was beheaded. Wild Dumrul, son of Dukakoja, tells how Wild Dumrul offended Allah by challenging Azrael, how Dumrul realized his mistake and found favor with Allah on condition that someone agreed to die in his place, how Dumrul's parents refused to die in place but his wife agreed, how Dumrul asked Allah to spare his wife and how Allah granted them 140 years. Korkut commands that this story be kept alive by the bards. Kanturali, son of Kanli Koja, tells how Kanturali won the heart and hand of infidel Princess Saljan of Trebizond by barehandedly defeating a bull, a lion, and a camel, how the princess's father changed his mind and sent 600 warriors to kill him, and how the princess helped Kanturali defeat her father's men. Korkut also appears in the story as the storyteller at the wedding. Yejanek, son of Kazalik Koja, tells how Kazalik Koja is captured by the infidel king Dereka Varsuvan while trying to raid Duzmurt Castle on the Black Sea, how he was held 16 years, how his son Yejanek grew up not knowing his father was a captive, how Yejanek found out his father was alive and asked permission from Bayandir Khan to rescue him, and how Yejanek defeated King Derek after Bayandir's other men failed. Korkut shows up at the celebration. How Baysat killed Goggle Eye, tells how Baysat was raised by a lioness and how Goggle Eye was born of a human father and a peri mother, how the 2 boys were raised as brothers, how Goggle Eye terrorized the Oghuz by demanding they continually provide young men and sheep for him to eat, how Baysat was convinced by one of the Oghuz mothers to fight Goggle Eye, and how Baysat defeated Goggle Eye in a fight that borrows heavily from the Polyphemus story in the Odyssey. Korkut plays a role in this story of the mediator between Goggle Eye and the Oghuz. Emran, son of Bagil, tells how Bagil becomes warden of Georgia for Bayandir Khan, but is tempted to rebel after feeling slighted by the Khan, how he breaks his leg after being thrown from a horse while hunting, how Shokli learns of his injury and attempts to attack him, how Bagil's son Emran takes his armor and leads Bagil's men to defend him, how God answers Emran's prayer for strength and how Emran gets Shokli to convert to Islam, how Bagil and Bayandir Khan are reconciled. Segrik, son of Ushankoja, tells how Ushankoja's elder son, Egrek, was captured by the Black King Nirjulfa and thrown into the dungeon of Alanya Tower, how Ushankoja's younger son, Segrik, grew up not knowing about his brother's captivity until he is taunted about it by some boys, how Ushankoja and his wife tried to prevent Segrik from going to find Egrek by marrying him, how Segrik refused to lay with his wife until he found out his brother's fate, how Segrik finds his way to the Black King's castle and fends off several attacks by the Black King's men, but is eventually overtaken by sleep, how the Black King promises to release Egrek if he will take care of this mysterious assailant, how Egrek and Segrik recognize each other, defeat the Black King's men and return home, how Salyokazan was taken prisoner and how his son Duras freed him, tells how Salyokazan was captured at Tomanan Castle in Trebizond, how he taunted the infidels and refused to praise them, how his son Duras grew up not knowing about his father, and how he found out about his father's imprisonment, how Duras led an army of nobles to rescue Salyokazan, how they attacked the Hagia Sophia in Trebizond, how Salyo was sent to protect the castle from the assailants, but learned who they were and did not kill them, how he and his son were reunited, how they attacked the infidels, and how they returned home, how the outer Oghuz rebelled against the inner Oghuz and how Bayrik died, how the outer Oghuz rebelled against Kasan Khan after feeling he had slighted them in favor of the inner Oghuz, how Kasan's uncle Uras, leading the rebels, tries to get his son-in-law Bayrik to join the rebellion, and how he kills Bayrik for refusing, how Bayrik is taken home, where he calls on Kasan to avenge him, how Kazan and his forces defeat Uras, after which the surviving rebels surrender and reconcile with Kazan. The Wisdom of Dede Korkut. Manuscript Tradition. Since the early 18th century, the Book of Dede Korkut has been translated into French, English, and Russian. However, it was not until it caught the attention of H. F. von Diez, who published a partial German translation of Dede Korkut in 1815, based on a manuscript found in the Royal Library of Dresden, that Dede Korkut became widely known to the West. The only other manuscript of Dede Korkut was discovered in 1950 by Ettore Rossi in the Vatican Library. Until Dede Korkut was transcribed on paper, the events depicted therein survived in the oral tradition, at least from the 9th and 10th centuries. The Bamzi Bayrik chapter of Dede Korkut preserves almost verbatim the immensely popular Central Asian dastan Alpamish, dating from an even earlier time. The stories were written in prose, but peppered with poetic passages. Recent research by Turkish and Turkmen scholars revealed that the Turkmen variant of the Book of Dede Korkut contains 16 stories, which have been transcribed and published in 1998. Dating the composition. The work originated as a series of epics orally told and transferred over the generations before being published in book form. There are numerous versions collected of the stories. It is thought that the first versions were in natural verse, since Turkish is an agglutinative language, but that they gradually transformed into combinations of verse and prose as the Islamic elements affected the narrative over time. Various dates have been proposed for the first written copies. Geoffrey Lewis dates it fairly early in the 15th century, with 2 layers of text, a substratum of older oral traditions related to conflicts between the Oghuz and the Pechenegs and Kipchaks, and an outer covering of references to The 14th-century campaigns of the Akoyanlu Confederation. Semel Kafadar agrees that it was no earlier than the 15th century, since the author is buttering up both the Akoyanlu and the Ottoman rulers. However, in his History of the Ottoman Empire, Stanford J. Shaw dates it in the 14th century. Professor Michael E. Meeker argues for two dates, saying that the versions of the stories we have today originated as folk stories and songs no earlier than the 13th century and were written down no later than the early 15th century. At least one of the stories existed in writing at the beginning of the 14th century, from an unpublished Arabic history, De Wadaris Jura al-Tijan, written in Egypt sometime between 1309 and 1340. A precise determination is impossible to come by due to the nomadic lifestyle of the early Turkic people, in which epics such as Dede Korkut passed from generation to generation in an oral form. This is especially true of an epic book such as this, which is a product of a long series of narrators, any of whom could have made alterations and additions, right down to the two 16th-century scribes who authored the oldest extant manuscripts. The majority of scholars of ancient Turkic epics and folk tales, such as Russian Soviet academician Vasily Bartold and British scholar Geoffrey Lewis, believe that the Dede Korkut text exhibits a number of features characteristic of Azeri, the Turkish dialect of Azerbaijan. Soviet treatment. The majority of the Turkic peoples and lands described in the Book of Dede Korkut were part of the Soviet Union from 1920 until 1991, and thus most of the research and interest originated there. The attitude towards the Book of Dede Korkut and other dastans related to the Turkic peoples was initially neutral. Turkish historian Hasan Bülent Paksay argues that after Stalin solidified his grip on power in the USSR, and especially in the early 1950s, a taboo on Turkology was firmly established. He observes that the first full-text Russian edition of the Book of Dede Korkut, by Azerbaijani academicians Hamid Arisli and M.G. Tamasibin, based on the Bartold translation of the 1920s, was published on a limited basis only in 1939 and again in 1950. He asserts, Turk scholars and literati were lost to the Stalinist liquidations and to the ideological assault waged on all dastans in 1950–52. According to Paksay, this taboo of the early 1950s was also expressed in the Trial of Alpamish, when all dastans of Central Asia were officially condemned by the Soviet state apparatus. Soviet authorities criticized Dede Korkut for promoting bourgeois nationalism. In a 1951 speech delivered at the 18th Congress of the Azerbaijani Communist Party, Azerbaijani Communist leader Mir Jafar Bagirov advocated expunging the epic from Azerbaijani literature, calling it a harmful and anti-popular book that is shot through with the poison of nationalism, chiefly against the Georgian and Armenian brother peoples. Nevertheless, the publication of dastans did not wholly cease during that period, as editions of Alpamish were published in 1957, 1958 and 1961, as they had been in 1939, 1941, and 1949. The entry on dastans in the second edition of the Great Soviet Encyclopedia does not contain any condemnation either, despite the liberalization of the political climate after the denunciation of Stalinism by Nikita Khrushchev in February 1956. The same Bartold edition of the Book of Dede Korkut was republished only in 1962 and in 1977. Problems persisted all the way to Perestroika, when the last full edition in Azerbaijani language was sent for publication on July 11, 1985, but received permission for printing only on February 2, 1988. UNESCO celebrations. In 1998, the Republic of Azerbaijan and UNESCO nominated, and in 2000 celebrated, the 1300th anniversary of the epic Azerbaijani legend Kitab-I-Dede Korkut. In 2000, the General Director of UNESCO remarked, "Epics, and I have in mind in particular that of the Turkish-speaking peoples attributed to Dede Korkut, perpetuated by oral tradition up to the 15th century before being written down, are vectors of the historical, geographical, political, social, linguistic and literary references of the peoples whose history they relate. Although many of these epics have already been noted down, the oral and gestural skills of the storytellers and griots who keep them alive should also be immortalized without delay. The matter is urgent. Since 1956, UNESCO has commemorated historic events and the anniversaries of eminent personalities celebrated by member states and associate members. In order to give them worldwide significance, Azerbaijan announced the Kitab-I-Dede Korkut as its first celebration of anniversaries in 1998. In 1999, the National Bank of Azerbaijan minted gold and silver commemorative coins for the 1300th anniversary of the epic.